Hello, everybody, and today we are going to be resuming our Cosmere journey because I have read Elantris. I have also read Emperor's Soul and The Hope of Elantris, which covers one of the planets in in Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere. I believe it's called SEL, Seal. So, what did I think about Elantris? So, Elantris is Brandon Sanderson's first published book. I'm not sure when exactly he published it, year here. This is I believe, Brandon Sanderson's eighth book he's ever written with the intention of publishing. Apologies on the hair. I don't know why it's so messed up, but you know what? That's just how we roll here. We're just chaotic like this. So this is his first published book, and I gotta say, it definitely shows. So if you don't know how my reviews work, we're gonna go to the spoiler free section, and then we're gonna go into the spoiler filled section. So time codes will be below. Let's start off with Elantris here. So Elantris is 90% politics and 10% magic. For a fantasy series, this is more akin to okay, so how do I go about Elantris? Elantris is definitely a really slow paced book. It's about 600 pages if you have the mass paperback, and I gotta tell you, I'm satisfied. See, this is difficult because I don't want to be too mean. Sanderson himself has been very critical of Elantris and him being this is not my most well-written book. I think his pacing is just so off. This book is not a mess. Okay, it's still a good book. It's just the pacing is incredibly slow, and I'm okay with slow-paced books, as long as it depends on the slow-paced book and your enjoyment of it. If you really enjoy the Elantris world, then you're gonna love it. For me, I need a little bit more. With a lot of Brandon Sanderson books moving forward, especially in Mistborn, there's political intrigue and mystery, but then there's also action to keep you engaged in between. Elantris is 90% politics and not a lot of action. It's just all about how this kingdom is run, what's to deal with Elantris, how people are feeling about Elantris, and this new religion that's coming into town that's trying to take over basically the kingdom too. You're following 3 different points of views, and it just gets a little jumbled. It gets a little messy. The pacing in this is very messy. It's also slow, and the magic system isn't really enhanced until the very end of the book. Brandon Sanderson has the classic Brandon Sanderson slope, or the Sanderson slope as I believe his fans call it, where basically a whole bunch of shit happens within the last 200 to 100 pages of the book. Even with his first published book, he still has that, but this one, because most of the book was very slow and stuff, I cared what happened to the characters, but that final act didn't really push it for me the Mistborn trilogy, which each one of those final acts was just I was gripped to my seat. This more felt unfortunately, I hate to be so cruel, but it did feel a little bit like Cosmere homework. It felt a little bit okay, you gotta read Elantris essentially, because some of the characters are reoccurring and some of the magic systems are similar to other parts of the Cosmere, so you have to eventually read Elantris. I decided to be you know what, I just finished the original Mistborn trilogy, I might as well jump right into Elantris, and I did. And I have started this book at least 4 times. When I was first trying to get into Brandon Sanderson, a lot of people were oh, well, it's his first published, so start with that. I would never recommend that. I would say do Mistborn, and then eventually, anytime before Way of Kings, I would get to Elantris, whether you want to read Warbreaker first or not. I've heard Warbreaker is a lot better, and people like Warbreaker a lot more, so that's the next one I'm going to be doing. Elantris is okay. It's fine. Just be prepared for a slow ride. I've heard that people actually gravitate toward the graphic audio or audiobooks for Elantris because they couldn't get through reading it, so instead they go through the audiobook version. I feel that's fine too, especially graphic audio. They're really, really good. They don't do completely one-to-one with the book, but they do pretty much close enough. I just thought this was a bit of a slog. The characters are interesting. So basically you have Elantris, and Elantris is this kingdom next to another kingdom, a little miniature kingdom, and then there's Elantris, which is this huge, majestic thing. Essentially, godlike people used to live, but then something happened to Elantris, and now all the Elantrians turn into these zombie-type people where, if you get nicked, if you get a little bruise, you feel that pain forever. It never goes away. Same with hunger. When you're hungry, you're starving in Elantris, and that hunger stays with you throughout. And I wish there was just a little bit more insanity and madness to it. There seem to be a lot more calm and collected people than one would think. That's one of my criticisms of the book. And then, so you have the prince who is next in line to be king thrown in there. And then you have his wife who just arrives at the kingdom when Rodin ends up at Elantris. Serene comes to Irulan and she's like, where my husband at? It's like, oh, he was banished. You still want to stick around though? She's like, I will for political movements. And they're like, right on. Pretty cool, pretty cool. And then you have Hudson, who is this guy. He's really coolly described, and like he's one of my favorite characters in the book. He's essentially like this priest who is like, okay, I need to convert this entire kingdom to our religion so he can seek control, basically. And that's what he's there for. So you have interesting three main characters, but it's not a lot of action. It's a lot of politicking. It's a lot of like, oh, how do we make Elantris better? You know, Hudson wants to take over. How's that going for him and stuff like that. So if you're reading all the Cosmere, you're gonna have to read Elantris. But like, if you don't want to, but you have to. Like, that's the thing with the Cosmere, you kind of have to, unless you just want to read a wiki of it. I wouldn't recommend a wiki of it. I think Elantris still has its merits. Like, you could still see Sanderson's prose here are pretty, they're not as good as like Mistborn, but they're pretty good. The characters themselves are interesting, but at the beginning there's a lot of setup for that, and it's not until like midway through the book where you're actually like, I actually deeply care about these characters and what they're going through, but not to a Mistborn level. And this is a standalone novel. Now, since then, Brandon Sanderson has said he's thinking about doing 2 more books in the Elantris series, so there's going to be a book 2 and book 3, and I'm interested in that to just see how his style has improved and how his storytelling has improved, especially with the ending of Elantris, so that'll be interesting. So let's get into the spoiler-filled review. If you want to click on the time code to skip to the Emperor Soul review, feel free to do that. Or if you've read the book or just like to hear my voice, let's get into spoilers. There's a lot that goes on in the book with political movements. Basically, you have Serene trying to kind of maneuver her way through the kingdom and take control in a way, because Irulan is just always has had a tough time, and since everyone loved the prince but hates his father, the king, everyone's trying to be like, all right, how can we politically maneuver this to where this kingdom's going to be a solid foundation instead of what it is right now where everyone's kind of miserable. So that's what Serene is up to. Then Hudson is like, I have this subordinate guy who's like kind of taking over my shit a little bit, and I'm a little upset by that. But then he does this cool maneuver. I do like Hudson for this, because you could just see he's like, I got like the Nosferatu vibes with him with the villain of that movie. Like he gives off those vibes, and he's just basically like, okay, what if I poison myself for 8 hours, get into Elantris, and then once I'm in Elantris, I'll be able to be healed, because technically I will have been dead, but technically if I'm in Elantris, I'll be alive again. So he does that, and then he comes back and he's like, I'm better than ever, I'm up on top. But then it turns out his subordinate was actually the main honcho, and Hudson was sent there to take over Elantris or give him a religion, but really his support is like, I'm not only am I taking over Irulan, I'm also taking over Elantris. I'm taking the whole fucking thing over because my wife was an Elantrian and she just suffered and I burned her and all I can hear is her screams. Like, it was very like, oh, I'm a villain. Oh, here are my motivations. And then that's it. So not a very strong villain. So much so that like I just finished the book today. I don't even remember the dude's name. He's a recurring character. I don't remember his name. I like Hudson though. I like how he got his little vengeance at the end there. That was cool. And he died, and like the way they send him off with the red cape at his grave, I think that's pretty cool. I'd be interested if people see him as a martyr, because they kind of set him up like that, or like a messiah type figure in the sequel books, because Serene, when she's doing that speech about him, like she's hyping him up. So I'm wondering if people are going to be like, oh, we're Harthinians or something like that. Like he himself has created a vision for his sacrifice and stuff like that. So that's really interesting. Rodin was interesting. He was creating a better place for Elantris, and I like that kind of stuff, that kind of politic. But eventually it's just like, oh my god, I'm reading about how they're getting food and stuff, like because of Sarine, and I'm just like, when is something going to happen that's not just like, oh, political move this, political move that. Well, have an assassination thrown in there or something like that, you know? Eventually, like, he realizes how the magic system works, and then it gets pretty cool. And then when he's like revived as like a Elantrian as people knew him before, with like the glowing skin and the white hair and stuff like that, and then they get like these epic magical powers. It felt a little bit like a Deus Ex Machina, I'm not gonna lie, but I don't know. I think the ending was fine when he was doing all that. He wasn't super overpowered. He could still get his ass kicked, but still. Serene is good. She's a very strong female character. However, toward the end, she's just like, all I want to do is be married. All I care about is like how men see me and stuff like that. And it's just like, okay, that's all right, I guess, sure. But I did like her. She was strong. She taught all the other women how to fight and stuff like that, so that was cool. And then after Hope of Elantris, she's pregnant with someone, she's pregnant with someone. She's pregnant with Rodent's baby, and they're going to have a kid together. So I don't know why I said it like that, but yeah, they're going to have a kid together. That's going to be interesting to see how they raise them. It's going to be interesting how much of a time jump they're going to do for the sequel of Brandon Sanderson. So that'll be interesting to see. But yeah, their relationship was pretty cool. Obviously, it's one book, so it's not like a Vin and Eldon build up in the Mistborn trilogy. They don't have 3 books to do that. But for what it was pretty good, pretty decent. But yeah, I mean, those are my thoughts on the ending. I also read Hope of Elantris, which is like a side story of where like how they saved the children and stuff like that. And apparently Brandon Sanderson wrote that because at the time he was dating his wife for about 2 months, and one of her 8th graders had read Elantris and didn't realize that like the teacher was, I believe, Emily Sanderson, like, was dating Brandon Sanderson, the author of the book. So then he did something a little special for her, and then like for their wedding, the student's gift was her original book report about Elantris. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty neat. I won't, there's nothing to be critical about it. It was just more of like, oh, here's like a little fun side bit of how they save the children, stuff like that. So yeah, so those are my thoughts on Elantris. Honestly, I would give it, if I had to rank it, I give it like a 3 out of 5, honestly. Yeah, so that's my thoughts on Elantris. Now into Emperor's Soul. So Emperor's Soul was good. I like this one actually a little bit more than Elantris. It was definitely shorter. I just liked how, and Brandon Sanderson actually wrote a little bit. I read Emperor's Soul in Arcanum Unbound, and like he wrote how like he went to China and he was like, oh, like on these certain pieces of art and certain pieces of building structures, like they would put a red stamp on it and stuff like that. And then that's how he got the idea to do like, oh, what if you could build someone's soul into a stamp? And like, it's like a really cool, just like one room book where you're like spending the majority of time with this character. I read it like a month ago, so I don't remember all the characters' names, but basically they're spending time in one room. I won't go into spoilers for Emperor's Soul. It's a quick book, just read it, actually. But yeah, I'd give it about 3 stars. But like, it's really interesting how like basically this emperor is dying, and then they're bringing this person who can like forge not only like souls but paintings too and objects too. So they're just like, okay, you're a criminal, but you know what? Make a soul for our emperor, and we'll let you go scot-free. And then it's revealed at the end, like you would obviously assume that they're not going to let her free after they imprint the Emperor's Soul. But like, it's interesting just her trying to figure out ways to get around escaping and stuff like that. Like, for example, like if every brick was exactly the same, she could just research the history of when the bricks were made, stuff like that, and like make it like a doorway so she could escape. But in her prison cell, essentially, it's all different bricks with all different origins, so it's not consistent, so she can't do it. But she could change like a small desk into a big desk and stuff like that. So the magic system is actually really interesting in this, whereas like in Elantris, it's more of like an afterthought toward the end. But yeah, Emperor's Soul was a lot of fun. You should definitely read it. It's really, really good. In fact, like, if you're like, all right, I'm not sure if I want to dive straight into a trilogy with Mistborn. I want to get a feel for Brandon Sanderson. I would say Emperor's Soul is like, if you just want a quick snippet of his writing style, of how he describes magic. In this one, the world building's very quick, but it's still very good. Yeah, I would give Emperor's Soul a chance. I'd give it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. But anyways, so next up for me is I'm going to be doing the White Sand graphic novels, and then I'm going to be reading Warbreaker for the first time. That's my next book in my Cosmere journey. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of this review. Do you absolutely love Elantris? Do you agree with my points? What do you guys think? I'm still enjoying the Cosmere. I just think that Elantris is definitely first book syndrome, but at the same time I can't be too critical because like I can only hope if I ever like self-publish or get like a first book published that it'll be even half as good as Elantris. I'm just coming at this from like I just read the Mistborn trilogy and then jumping into Elantris is like very different. But anyways, maybe you guys like the slower paced stuff. Let me know. Let me know how I did on this review. You know, if you have any critiques on like what I should go more into depth with these book reviews and stuff. I'm still trying to learning my review style. But yeah, that's going to be it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Also, check out my second channel where I do more in-depth video essays about random topics, not just about books, video games, movies, and stuff like that. That's over at Black Hudson. We also occasionally do live streams, so check that out as well. Anyways, that's going to be it for me, guys. Next up is going to be Warbreaker, and then I'm still reading The Dark Tower, so I'll do a couple of reviews on that as well. All right, see you guys.